are loads of interesting computational features inside OM system cameras, and I thought it was about time I explore them a little bit more. I've challenged myself to create 3 live composite photographs. I'm heading out to do some star trails and also something in the city as well. It's going to be a little bit more experimental, that one. So I'm going to show you how I get on and my thought processes behind these images, and I'll also walk you through how live composite works as well if you have that in your camera. Let's start with some star trails. After checking the weather forecast, I headed out to the location on the hunt for some clear skies. I've just arrived at the cottage for some star trails, and clearly it was very cloudy and rainy on the way in, so I was quite worried, but thankfully the forecast is saying that it's going to be clear all night, and look what I have to deal with. One great benefit of shooting star trails over more traditional astrophotography is, yes, we still need a clear night, but if you're in an area that has a little bit of light pollution, it's not the end of the world. It can wash out those traditional astrophotography shots, but because we're using longer exposure times for star trails, because we sort of want to get them to blur in the sky, light pollution plays less of a factor. So if you're in a little town or anything, you can definitely give this a go yourself. So it looks like the forecast was correct. I could not have asked for better, to be honest. It was very, very misty before, but it is absolutely clearing up lovely. And we've got some great lighting now as well. The OM system OM1 is ideal for star trail photography. It has live composite mode built in, of course, but it's also weather and freeze resistant for those cold nights. The battery life is incredible too, which is important for live composite mode, as some photos can take over an hour or more to capture. Paired with the OM1, I have the delightful Olympus 7-14 f2.8 Pro wide-angle lens. The fast aperture will help keep my ISO nice and low, and it's super sharp even wide open. I also love the look of star trails when you shoot with a really wide-angle lens, which you'll see shortly. If you're in the market for some new kit, OM System have some brilliant special offers on in November and December. Check out the link in the description for more info, after you've watched the video, of course. Now, if you know what live composite mode is, skip to this timestamp and we'll head to the first photograph. If you're new to live composite, get ready to have your mind blown. So the way that live composite mode works is you set a base image and you can set how long that exposure is. I've just set it to a couple of seconds, 2 seconds, while it's quite bright. But once you have that base image, then the camera will do 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, and it will only add in changes to the light. So theoretically, you could leave that shutter open for like a full hour and it wouldn't overexpose like it would if you was in a normal bulb mode. So you begin by going to B mode and then moving to the live composite mode by changing the dial here. And then in the menu, you've got your live composite settings. So you can go all the way up to 60 seconds, I think. Yeah, up to 60 seconds. Going to do 2 seconds. Press the shutter once to do your base image. And now it's ready for live composite shooting. And now that is going. And nothing will change on that image now until I add light in, which I'll do with my phone. So as you can see, I've just added in some light and this is still going. You can see here at the top, it's still adding and adding and adding, and it's not overexposing. So right now I can see how that's going to look if I press stop. But I could carry on if I wanted to. I could go and add in some more light. And now we can see that this has been going for over a minute here. And you can see that I've added in more light into the composition now. I'm quite happy with that. And then all I need to do to stop it is press the button and then we're banked. Now, if you'd left this open in a standard mode for 60 seconds, it's going to be completely white. So now you can see the power of live composite mode. So using this mode, when it gets dark enough, and hopefully it stays nice and clear, I'm going to set up some compositions and I'm going to get some star trails. For star trails compositions, I think one of the main pitfalls people find themselves in is they get so obsessed with the stars doing cool things that the rest of the photography goes out of the window a little bit. I think a strong foreground is what makes or breaks a star trails composition. You want something that can emphasize the movement in the sky or juxtapose it or work with it in some way. Some interesting focal point as well as the stars. If you just have the stars, you know, it's technically a cool thing to experiment with, but it does not make a great overall image. So foreground, foreground, foreground. While I've got some light
I think it's a good idea to sort of check how some compositions might work. I've got a very wide angle lens. It's a 7 to 14 millimeter. And I think having the actual cabin that I'm staying at might be a good composition. So I was thinking maybe like that. So we've got the pyramid in the foreground and then the sky, the star trails will be going on behind. That could work out perfectly because it looks like Polaris, the North Star, is going to be just above the cabin. And I spied this as soon as I arrived, having the camera down here and looking out this way, so the cabin is still in the scene, I think might be a nice composition as well. I'm going to try a few things. Hopefully we'll have a clear night for enough hours to give a few things a go. Now we've just got to wait for it to get dark. Okay, so it's just about dark enough. It's always good practice to have a red light because that helps with your night vision. I've got the first composition in mind. I've got the OM1 here at 7 millimeters pointing up. And in the settings, I'm going to do 30 seconds. And then it's just a matter of leaving it for a little while and hoping for the best. So as you can see, we can see on screen that it's developing. We've done 23 30-second exposures here and still the cottage isn't blown out any more than when we started. And we can see that the star trails are where we wanted them. Eek!
So with everything going to plan, I left it for a further 30 minutes and things were looking good. It was just a matter of waiting, right? Well, Icarus, as they say, flew too close to the sun.
We got some flares because we got some condensation. Boo.
When I came back for the third time, the night had turned muggy and the lens had started to fog up. It's such a shame because I had such high hopes for this composition. But I still have plenty more to try. On to the next. A second consideration with your composition is to figure out which way the stars will appear to move in the sky. I mean, it's Earth that's moving, but you get the idea. Stars will appear to shift around the North Star Polaris. So if you would like to have the focal point, the center of the spinning in your composition, using an app like PhotoPills can be really helpful. If you're one of those really clever people that can just look up the sky and see it, then you are way better than me. But I use the augmented reality feature in PhotoPills just to point it at the sky until I find Polaris, and then I know that if I have that in the scene, that's where the stars will appear to move around.
Okay, we have a change of plan. The clouds are coming in from the place that I was hoping to point the cameras, so instead I'm going to use a tree as the subject and this gate here and hopefully get something interesting. I'm going to turn this off. We're going to do the base image and then we're going to get it recorded. And then I may do some more light painting for the foreground once it's finished. Let's see it in about half an hour. Looking good. And 2 hours in, I am quitting while I'm ahead. I'm just going to light paint an additional foreground image just to be on the safe side.
One thing that's good practice when you're doing nighttime photography, whether it's star trails or general astrophotography, is to always consider having a backup photograph of the foreground. Because you can layer these up in editing, it's relatively simple to do. So you could consider having a really long exposure to make sure that the foreground is bright enough, or you could paint in with light to make sure that the foreground is illuminated enough.
Okay, next composition. I'm going to use the cottage from further away. And we've got the other camera here. So light out. Let's do the base image.
When I took the base image of this composition, I thought it looked so cool as a standalone image, I've actually just kept a single frame. And then I started the live composite to add in the star trails.
It's looking pretty good.
So
last night was loads of fun. I ended up staying up till about 1:30 in the morning because it got nice and clear much later on. There were some hits and some misses, to be honest. There's some images that I really like and some that I think could have been better. One thing that did thwart me is getting condensation on the lens because it was so cold and it was a very still night. You find when the air is very still, it will build up a little bit more on the lens. There's a couple of solutions to this. You can use, you know, like those crackable hand warmers. You can use those around the lens, like put a sock on or something around the lens to keep them warm. Or you can buy lens heater sleeves, which, as I am a cheapskate at heart, I have been putting off for many, many years now. But I've just bought one. It was actually really cheap. It's actually an interesting thing with live composite. There are definitely pros and cons. The pros being, of course, you can see what's happening. You know when to stop. There is very little editing after required because it's all done in camera for you. The cons being any mistakes that are made is baked into that one file and there's not much you can do to rectify it. So that was an hour down the drain. So pros and cons and a lot of things to learn, even as someone who's been using live composite mode for many, many years. I think for star trail photography, live composite mode is a great way to get started and wrap your head around it and really visualize your compositions without wasting too much time in editing.
So if you don't have any hand warmers or heated lens sleeves handy, another workaround to help reduce any fog on your equipment is to properly acclimatise your camera. That way there's not much temperature difference between the lens and the air around it. Just remember to open your bag and also remove all batteries because the cold can kill them. Keep the batteries warm inside with you until you're ready to shoot. This was my plan for day 2, and spoiler, it worked! For the second night, while I had fixed my fog problem, I had a new problem. I was at the mercy of the clouds, and unfortunately the clear skies were out into the darkness where I couldn't vet the foreground. So this first composition was very much hit and wish.
Finally, there's no fog. Yay! I'm gonna leave it for 10 more minutes. I don't want to jinx it. And then that one's in the bag. So I'm going to use this device, damn that's bright, to try and illuminate the foreground for a 6-second exposure so that I can stack it back home. So I've waved around like a lunatic and I've got a foreground image illuminated. Time for another composition before the clouds ruin everything. Okay, so we've got the Milky Way in this image, which is really, really nice. So I might just do a couple of single frames of this before starting the live composite, because it's so pretty.
I decided I had to improvise. I couldn't ignore my own advice. The subject matters just as much as the stars. So I decided to make the camera and myself the star of the show in these next compositions. I used my own M1 as the subject, and then my friend's OM1 to capture the images. This photo is a stack of a live composite image, and I experimented with different foreground shots by leaving the camera on a time lapse after we'd finished. That way, I could pick the best of the bunch and just overlay it on top. Okay, time for something a little bit different. Let's head into the city at night.
So this composition, I've got a really wide angle lens, so I can see the traffic here, I can see the traffic coming across, and I can see the traffic going down. And I think it might make for an interesting image because we have the Liver building and all the other sort of big buildings on the waterfront in Liverpool around it. So I've set the base image. I've got a 5-second exposure and I can just leave it running now. And the benefit of live composite versus a standard manual long exposure is it doesn't matter if there's a couple of seconds between the traffic lights changing, because I know that this won't overexpose as I leave it to capture. If I was shooting manually, it would just be a mess. And there probably wouldn't be enough time between the exposures to get everything that I want to capture. So now I'm going to leave it for a good few seconds. And there's a lovely big bus that's gone past, which is going to look quite nice. And I think that looks really good. I think this is one composition in the bag.
So unlike with star trails where you need 30 minutes to an hour for things to start looking good, I think with traffic trails, the overall time per composition is much, much shorter. Maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes max. So I'm going to go for the spray and pray method and try a couple of different things.
For this one, I have a little glimpse of the Ferris wheel in the background that's going round, and I also have some light trails from the car. I really like this white winding wall as well in the composition. So when the cars move, I'm going to leave it running for a little while and see what it looks like. But I think the place to be at the moment is over at the wheel. It seems to be turning quite regularly, and I think that might look quite nice as a live composite. So we'll go there next. The wheel is going round. It took a long time. We've just finally found someone to go in. And I'm just going to leave it going, another 5-second exposure. And I've got in the composition the reflection of the wheel on the water as well. So this could be quite interesting, and hopefully if it goes around long enough, I should be able to try a few different compositions. That is not shabby. I like that it's silhouetting the trees as well. That's quite cool. Got the base image just as the wheel has stopped spinning, because everything hates me tonight. But they can't have gone all the way around, right? They can't have gone all the way around. They're closing the doors. One thing I'd like to say throughout this whole thing is I've not really been that bothered about manual focus or autofocus. The camera knows quite intelligently that once the focus is set, to stay there. I've not had any issues at all. Of course, when I was doing star trails, it's best practice to get the focus nailed yourself, because it's very dark conditions and you need those stars to be pin sharp. But in everyday scenarios like this, the OM1 here is more than capable of figuring it out for you, and it doesn't hunt throughout the live composite modes. Please just start moving again. Please. I'm not asking for much. Can I pay you to go on the wheel so it'll move again?
Yeah, no.
No, I can't send you on your own, can I? That would be mean.
There you go.
It's going again. I just want the reflections to be in the water really, really clear. Does it look super cool? So for this composition, I quite liked a 2-second exposure so that you could still see the spokes in the water. I only left it for a few seconds. This is going to show you what it looks like if you leave it for a long, long time versus a short time. Both effects are pretty cool. It just depends on what you're going for in your final image. So I'm really utilising the wide angle lens for these next shots. I want to get as close to the wheel as possible and really show off how big it is. But I think on its own, it's quite boring because it just ends up like a big white subject. So I'm trying to get some reflections in the buildings around it as well. So I'm going to try a couple of different angles of that before it stops moving. Typical, I just got close and it stopped moving, but I actually quite like the effect of it. It's given it sort of like, you can see the holes inside the Ferris wheel. So I quite like that. And what's cool is there was a few people walking through that whole composition, and because we were on sort of a live composite, they don't show up at all because they haven't added any light to the scene. So it's a really clean composition. I quite like what I've got with the Ferris wheel so far. If it starts going again as we move away, I'll get some more. If not, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. So if your camera has live composite mode, I think it's the perfect time of year to give it a try. We have longer nights at this time of year, so there's plenty of opportunities to get some longer exposures. If you found this video cool, then check out the OM1 Mark II review here, OM Systems' latest flagship camera. I took it on a lovely holiday around the Faroe Islands and had a great time with it.